I study the brain and how this lump of jelly allows us to think, to perceive, and to feel. How these 100 billion tiny brain cells make us who we are. Now, I'm also interested in art, and art can tell us a lot about the brain. It can show us the progression of a dementia like Alzheimer's disease, or it can also give us evidence of the recovery of function after a brain injury like a stroke. In some cases, artists can even show a complete change of style after a brain injury. So in this case, after the brain injury, there was a much more cartoonish style with a poorer grasp of perspective than the same scene painted earlier from the same artist. Now today I'm going to tell you a story about an artist, a German artist called Johannes Matthias Koltz. And he was a man whose remarkable life and what happened to his masterpiece tells us something about humanity, but also about how the brain operates. At the age of 20, he witnessed the horrors of war at the Western Front. In his time there, he was decorated for bravery when he rescued a group of German soldiers in a collapsed trench. But his experiences in the trenches had a profound effect on his life and his outlook. After the war, he became an accomplished artist, mainly portraits and still life. But he was also a very active pacifist and outspoken anti-war campaigner. And this was reflected in his great masterpiece, which he called Thou Shalt Not Kill. So this was his great pacifist statement about the futility and carnage of war. It took him 13 years, and it was a gigantic triptych, 8 feet tall by 24 feet across. Now, this is the only known photograph of his triptych. It was taken in 1933, about 4 years before it was finished. And you can see there are still some details missing. The soldiers are missing from the base of the cross, and some of the other details have yet to be painted. Now, in 1937, he was commissioned to paint a portrait of Adolf Hitler. And when he refused, they issued an arrest warrant for him. But through incredible serendipity, the SS officer sent to arrest him was one of the men he had rescued from the trenches at Verdun. So he gave him 48 hours to get out of Munich. Now, this left him with a huge dilemma of what to do with this enormous picture. It was too big to take with him, but if he left it behind, it would be destroyed as anti-Nazi propaganda. So the solution that he arrived at was to take it to a nearby sawmill, where he had them cut it into 26 smaller paintings. Now, some of these he took with him, and others he gave to trusted friends to hide or to keep safe, maybe one day to put back together. He fled to England, but he was interned as an enemy alien and sent to Australia to a work camp. But eventually, after the war, he returned to England and lived out his last years in Cork, in Curraglass, where he died in 1971. In recent years, his daughter, who lives in Waterford, has set about trying to recover the missing pieces of this triptych. And so far, 6 of them have been found. But there are rumours that others have been sighted in private collections in Austria and Poland. Now, what happened to Koltz's triptych is actually a lovely parallel for what happens to visual images in our visual system. Images that we see are literally broken apart by our visual cortex at the back of the brain and later reassembled. So in the visual cortex, we have areas that process edges, colors, line segments, and curves, as well as other regions that process shapes, objects, moving form, and even faces. Then, these specific regions all recombine the information that they process in parallel, so that what we perceive is a unified picture again. So just like his triptych, it's taken apart, scattered, and then recombined to give us a unified percept. The story also touches on a principle from the area of neuroaesthetics, which is the study of how the brain processes art and beauty. And this is the idea that something that's unfinished or incomplete, like the Venus de Milo or like the triptych, engages our brain in a special way. So these are 4 paintings of the same scene by Cézanne, and the bottom 2 look like they're not finished. The mountain is barely visible. And the idea is that our brain is engaged because it likes to fill in blanks and join the dots. This is why we can perceive a Dalmatian in this array of dots in the top left, or how we can read the sentence despite the missing letters. It also explains why sometimes silhouettes are more interesting or more engaging than a fully visible figure, which they call the peekaboo effect. So that's the story of Johannes Koltz. I think it's a story about the human spirit, but also about how we perceive and how our brain operates. And I think this unfinished story is a nice example of life imitating art, imitating science. Thank you.